While I might be new to YouTube, I've been collecting 6 scale figures and statues for about 12 years now, and I've noticed in Facebook groups quite a bit recently that there's a lot of new collectors that are asking for tips on how to get started with collecting. And seeing these questions has made me reflect on my own journey in collecting and what I did well and what perhaps I could have done better. So with that in mind, I've come up with my 5 top tips for new Hot Toys collectors or people who are perhaps just looking to become a little bit more focused in their collecting. My first tip is to consider your space. Space is the enemy of every collector. It's something everybody wishes they had more of. So before you start buying figures, take the time to consider where are they going to go, how are you going to display them? Is it a case that you might have a few detoffs in a theatre room, in your living room? Do you have a room that you can dedicate to collecting where you might have a few big glass cabinets like I have behind me? Will you have a whole room full of module cases? So if you can work out how much space you can dedicate and also what kind of display cabinets you plan to use, that's going to then allow you to roughly work out how many figures you can house in your display comfortably. If you know roughly how many figures your collection can contain and how you plan to display them, that leads into my next point. My second tip is to consider your collecting approach, and this is why it's handy to know roughly how many figures your collection can display, because that can help you make some decisions into how you're going to collect Hot Toys, how deep you might go into different lines. It's really easy when you're a new collector to chase deals and just get on the high of buying figures, and every time you see something cheap, you buy it. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't fit in with your long-term vision for your collection, you're ultimately going to end up just selling those figures. And despite what people say, it can often be hard to get your money back on figures unless the figure you've bought is something that's long sold out and highly sought after. I'm thinking of things like Days of Future Past Wolverine or Yondu or Hela. Unless the figure you've bought is a grail that's really sought after, odds are you're probably going to sell that figure for less than you bought it for. You're also probably going to be in a situation where you're going to waste a lot of time with people on Facebook Marketplace or eBay. I'm speaking from experience. There's a lot of tire kickers out there that are just going to looking to lowball you or ask if things are available, and then you'll never hear from them again. So save time, save money. Think of your collecting approach and just buy the figures that fit in with that approach. So when it comes to considering your collecting approach, have a think about what your favorite characters or franchises are, and depending on your space, how deep are you going to go into those lines? Have a think about your display and which cabinets you're thinking of going towards. So if you want to have detoffs, do you want to have just one character per shelf? Do you want every character to have a companion piece? These are things that it's important to consider, because if you've got that idea of how many figures your display can contain, how you plan to display them, what are your favorite franchises and characters, you can then map out the figures that you plan to buy. Drawing out my collection and where I plan to display figures is something I found really handy to do. I've been playing catch up a little bit with my display and having enough room to display my figures. I started off with these 2 big cabinets behind me. I thought they were going to be enough room. They weren't. I added on a couple of detoffs. I didn't have room for my vehicles. I'm now building a garage display cabinet. So I'm speaking from experience. If you have an idea of your space, how you plan to display, how many figures you can collect, it's going to make a big difference and save you that time and money from selling figures that don't actually fit in with your long-term vision. If you're new to collecting, the odds are that you're probably going to look to buy some figures that have been previously released, and this leads into my third tip, which is to do your research on any quality control or damage issues on previously released figures. In particular, a lot of figures that use pleather really haven't aged well with time. I think of figures like the original Winter Soldier, a lot of the Scarlet Witch figures, Odin. A lot of these figures that use pleather, they just have deteriorated over time. So it's important to be aware of these issues before buying older figures, particularly if you're buying those figures mint in box. The odds are when you crack that open, you might find a damaged figure. Even if you're buying newer figures mint in box, do some research and make sure you are going in with open eyes as to what some of the issues might be with these figures. If you're buying a new figure, online reviews are really useful to watch. That's the great thing with YouTube now. There's so many people making figure reviews. So make sure that you are watching reviews of people that actually have the figure in hand. There's a lot of people that are doing reaction videos to things like blogger photos, promo photos, and to be honest, I don't think a lot of those photos show the figures in the best light. So a lot of the times people are making these videos and they're reacting really negatively to a figure where the reviewers actually have it in hand. They think a lot of these things are a non-issue. So if you're watching reviews, make sure that the person has the figure in hand. So when it comes to research, don't just do research on the figures, also make sure you're doing research on sellers. The best place to buy for may vary depending on where you live in the world and whether it's a Hot Toys release or a third-party release. One of the biggest tips I give people is when you join Facebook groups, use the search function. It's the best way to quickly and easily find out what people's views and experiences are on dealing with sellers. So if there's an online store that you found and you want to do a little bit of research to find out how good they are to deal with, join Facebook groups, search for that seller, see what experiences people have had, or alternatively, if you don't know where to buy from, maybe go into the Facebook groups and search for your country or your city and see if anybody has posted about the stores they buy from and the experiences that they've had. And if you decide to buy a secondhand figure from a fellow collector in a Facebook group, don't be afraid to ask for references. If you've never dealt with someone before, there's no issue with posting in a group to say, hey, I'm looking to buy from this person, I'm looking for references, who's dealt with them, what's your experience been like? I always think it's better to be safe than sorry in these situations, and my preference when buying from Facebook is always to do so in person, but if you're buying from someone online, don't be afraid to ask for references and always make sure that you're paying goods and services through PayPal. It just gives you that little bit of buyer protection in case something goes wrong. My fifth and final tip is that it pays to be patient. There are so many factors that can influence the price of a figure, the biggest being hype and scarcity. Sometimes when figures are up for pre-order, they're just not popular at the time. That means Hot Toys doesn't make any of them, so they become quite scarce and sought after later on. At times, it can be really easy to buy into the hype of a film that's just come out. For example, Guardians of the Galaxy 3 has just come out. A lot of people are now chasing figures like Yondu and Drax. And this is possibly the worst time to buy them because the hype is high, so anybody looking to sell is going to be looking for top dollar. This is where patience really pays off because if you're willing to wait, quite often there are bargains to be had. So my advice would be when you've decided your collecting approach, you know which figures you want to chase, take the time to look around different Facebook groups to see what the asking prices are for these figures. From there, you can start making a mental note of how much these figures are going for and also how much you're prepared to pay. As I say that, you do need to be realistic. You're not going to get a Days of Future Past Wolverine or a Hela or a Yondu for $200. But you might see them for $800 and think, well, that's a bit high for me. I'm more comfortable at about the $500 mark. When you've got that ballpark figure in mind, it means that when a figure comes up for that price, you know that's in your ballpark and you can proceed with confidence knowing that that's a price you're willing to pay for that figure. I just want to say I am not advocating lowballing people. If someone's listed a figure for hundreds of dollars more than you're willing to spend, do not message them and give them your price that you're willing to spend. Don't waste people's time. My approach has very much been that I've set that mental figure in my mind and I've waited for it to happen. An example of this is the Avengers 1 Hawkeye. When I decided I wanted to collect the first Avengers line, this figure was going for about $500, which was more than I wanted to pay. By waiting, when subsequent Hawkeye figures were released and announced, the price of that figure came down. So I was able to get that Hawkeye for $300 just by waiting. So that's why I say have a price in mind, keep an eye on the groups, and when something comes up for the price that you want, proceed with confidence if it's in that ballpark of what you want, if it's in good condition, if you trust the seller. So that's my top 5 tips for new Hot Toys collectors. I hope you found this video useful. If you've got any tips of your own, I'd love to know what they are. Please leave them down in the comments below. I'd also love it if you could hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. I'm pretty new to creating content on YouTube, so I'm also open to any feedback you may have on how I can make these videos better.